So, anyway, I'm going to pass it on to our next speaker, Tony Ruiz. Y'all give Mr. Ruiz a round of applause, please.
Thank you. And she said, that's where you could buy things. I'm like, what do you mean buy things? See, in Cuba, once the government took over, everything was supplied. You didn't need money. You had ration cards. And the rations are still, to this day, 1/4 pound of beef per person per week, 3 ounces of rice per person per week. It's just like that. Why do you think they want to keep a population near starvation? Any guesses?
Control.
They can't fight back. You're too weak. Then they took our guns away. Oh, there'll be peace. There was revolution. We removed the guns. Nobody will fight nobody. Yeah, they have the guns. So in our street, and people wonder, how does this happen? It's simple. You keep turning over your rights, as the future governor said, and you keep getting them slice by slice. So that's how it started. Then they decided to confiscate all foreign-born businesses. Meaning, if they're American businesses, Canadian, whatever, they shut them down, took them over. Everybody applauded, oh yeah, the rich, take away from the rich. Then they went and took after the Cubans who owned businesses like my dad. And they seized it through eminent domain and gave us nothing. They came and they seized our car because other people didn't have cars. And these are stuff paid for. You know, back then they didn't have credit. They come and take your house and give you a deed and say, now you'll pay rent. Little by little, they just keep taking it away. But without guns, without voice, without speaking up, you have no choice. So I tell people, if you're afraid now, God help us when it tightens up.
That's right.
Right now we have freedom. The only fear that you have is in your head. The only fear you have is in your head. You're afraid to speak up among your coworkers. You're afraid to speak up among your neighbors. You're afraid to speak up. And I guarantee you that about 80% of this nation's population are like us. They've just, the media controls. Why do you think the media has such a tight hold? Because they're a minority. They have to keep that going. They're in cahoots with the government. The minute you lose the media to the government, we live under communism. If you were born in the 60s or 70s, you've been raised in socialism through the schools. That's why you're passive. I sound cynical, but sometimes when I hear, the home of the free and the brave, I'm like, we're not. Look around you. This should be full. So the American people, except a few, are the brave and the free. The rest are the bound and the gagged. Sheep. Yes, sheep. So I came here to give you some dose of reality. The first they do it away, I was a school teacher, a public school teacher for over 20 years in New York State and here in Oklahoma, and I started realizing that they were eroding away the American history. If you go back in ancient times, when the Roman government was collapsing, that was because of corruption, about sin totally out of control. What did they do? They built those stadiums. They called them circuses. And they brought in gladiators and all that. And then they fed them bread. So circus and bread kept the people happy and quiet. You know what keeps the people happy and quiet today? Rhino politicians that say a lot and do little. And I'm going to call out names. Remember Gowdy during the Clinton thing?
Yes.
Oh, man, we were so proud of him. We were so proud. Oh, he is talking and talking and talking. Where are we now? Where's Clinton? Not in prison, where she deserves to be. Is she in prison?
No.
So after all was said and done, more was said than done. Then Marco Rubio in Miami, Cuban Immigrant, did the same thing. Now, I don't want you to applaud, please, that's not what I'm saying. My wife and I are January 6ers because God told us to go that day. We didn't know. We just got in the car and went. And what we saw and what was on the news were two totally different worlds. And we were like, this doesn't even make sense. The police are kind of blocking us, but then every so often they would move the barriers back. And we're like, okay, hey, if they yield space, we take it. Well, they yielded space all the way up in the Capitol. They did tear gas and do all those things. I think it was a show.
Yeah.
And so we finally got on the inaugural steps. And I was so proud that day, and I'm still proud that day. I'm a proud January 6er because that day I went there to petition our government to audit the vote.
Right.
And they didn't do it.
Right.
So all those Republicans up there are cowards.
Yes.
They didn't do it. And they should be, every time they get up on the mic, they should say, recount that vote. Recount, and they don't. Oh, move on to the next one. What do you think is going to happen in 2024 if we don't take care of 2020? 2020. So our vote won't matter. It's like Pastor Robin Bullock. He's out of Warrior, Alabama. He went to one of these things, and the politicians were there, and it was Ted Cruz, and he was like, "You gotta fight, you gotta fight, you gotta fight." And he goes, "How do we fight?" And he says, "You gotta vote." He says, "We did vote. Why'd you fix it?"
Right.
So the problem is we gotta hold these guys accountable. You gotta keep on it. If the vote the president of the United States today is Donald J. Trump.
Amen.
And that abomination in the White House that was unelected, unconstitutional, and illegal is still in power. We're under a coup.
That's right.
And America's passive. I would never thought I'd live this. My mother, when she was dying in 1986, told me, when you get to be in your 50s or 60s, you're going to be battling communism. And I laughed in her face. I said, "Mom, that's impossible." She goes, "No, it's not impossible. It's going to happen. I'm watching it." Everything that happened in the United States right now happened in Cuba, except it's real slow motion. So it's kind of like the frog in the water, right? You keep turning up the heat, until you're dead. So that's why we need people like Dr. Sherwood who's willing to stand up. We need people like Lawmeyer who's willing to stand up for us. We need to get involved. We need to call them and say, "How could I help you?" Some of you can't walk around neighborhoods, but you can call. Some of you could join in mailing or phone call, whatever. Get involved. And by the way, one of the most effective things that you can do is what my wife does, which is call. Call the representatives. Believe me, it does work, because we talked to this lady in Washington, D.C. who had been there for multiple administrations during the Obama campaign. And when we were there, when he was there and we were calling, she would say, "You have no idea how effective this is." They're terrified. They're terrified of public opinion. Call. It's so easy. You don't even have to be rude or mad. You just have to say, "Hello, this is whatever, Governor Stitt. Hey, I want you to stand up for this. I watch you what you're doing, and you know what? You're all talking, very little action." Right? You think all these things. Why are there still mandates in Oklahoma? We're in a red state, all 77 counties. And we have a Republican governor who refuses to challenge the mandates. He is not the rightful governor. We need a guy like him. So that's why you have to get involved. Don't be afraid to call. I know, I got nervous the first time. I'll admit, I was like, "Oh God." But you call up there and they're like, "Yeah." And those people are volunteers, by the way. So they're very easy. And why am I saying this? I was a teacher, so I'm teaching you. You call those numbers. I don't care if you're meek. You just say, "Hey, you know what? I'm not really happy with what's going on. I'm not into this. This is not good. We need to do," and the more calls they get, the more fearful they get. And then that shakes it up. You got to knock them off balance so they don't think they could do whatever they want. So luckily, it took us 6 years to get out of Cuba. So I lived all that. And so my mother said, "Look, we're going to go to this great land called America." And she drew me a little American flag. And she showed me it, and then she burned it. And I'm like, "Why are you burning it?" She goes, "No one must ever know here what I taught you. You better shut your mouth when you go to school. Just go with whatever they say, but don't, this is your new home. This is America. This is your new home. You're going to learn English, and you're going to do all these things, and you're going to become an American, and you're never going to be quiet." And that's why we're going there. Because my parents were well-to-do in Cuba. We had no reason to leave. But we left because of freedom. Money isn't everything.
That's for sure.
The reason there isn't a lot of people out here is because it still hasn't hurt us in the pocketbook. Oh, it's starting to. It's starting to. And what I've always told my wife, she always hated me to say it, it's got to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better.
That's true.
And unfortunately, might have to suffer a little bit. But that's what's going to make you and your neighbor get off your butts and do it. I'm not talking to you. You guys are great. If you're here, you're doing stuff. But the people, your neighbors, the people in your church, start taking. The biggest resistance I got was in my church. Because I would tell them, you have no idea what's coming down the pike. I was teaching my kids about abortion, about homosexuality. I was teaching them all those things, and the parents are complaining. And I'm like, I'm not saying to hate them. I'm just saying this is what the Bible says. We are to love those people and bring them into the kingdom. Let the Holy Spirit deal with them. But they challenged it. And 3 times they took me away from being a youth pastor. Because they're afraid of offending. We got to stop afraid of offending, because you know what's going to be horrible? When offense is no longer going to be effective. Meaning, they're going to offend you and it's not going to be effective. Because they're going to have all the power. But they're not. So, I am so privileged that you asked me to speak. And I don't know, I can't remember who was it you spoke to. They said, can you speak for 5 hours? I could speak for 8. There is so much I could tell you about the experiences I had. The experiences of school when they tried to make me a pioneer for world communism. And the way you don't understand is just like they're doing now. I was 6, 7 years old in 1st grade. And they were like, if you become a pioneer, then, you can't leave the country. You've made the decision. And so I had to sit on my hands. And it got to the point where they would just come for me to be able to raise my hand, and then they would stop. And my fellow classmates would say, just raise your hand, please. We're so tired of this. And I'd be like, no. They were tired, but they were trying to get me indoctrinated. And my parents said, we're leaving. And it sounds harsh, but we'll leave you behind. We're going to freedom. And so I just sat on my hands and sat on my hands. I could still tell you what that desk looked like, because I spent a lot of time. And that's what they're doing in your children in the schools. They're doing all this gender bending and all this nonsense that does not belong in pre-K, 3rd grade, or anywhere else. It doesn't belong in the schools. I was a teacher. I wouldn't last 5 minutes now in a public school. It is so crucial you begin to talk to your neighbors. You will be surprised how many agree with you, and just get them to vote. Get them to speak up. And the rest of us that know, keep telling them, hey, we haven't given up on 2020. You got to fix that. All these machines got to go. All these machines got to go. Don't you think it's kind of funny? Did you know where they're warehousing a lot of those machines in Caracas, Venezuela? And right after the elections, the United States was sending an FBI team to go investigate the machines. The same, what are they called? The domain? Dominion machines. Well, you know what? That whole warehouse caught fire and burned to the ground. Wow. What?
That's what happened in Tennessee.
The same thing happened in Tennessee. So you got to hold them accountable. Guess what? We've got all the evidence. We just need courage and patriots and strong people that are going to stand up and say, we will not stop until that vote is counted. Because it doesn't matter. It's somewhere where we've never been before. It's scary, isn't it, to think what would happen. So currently we have 2 presidents. One who is politely standing back, following constitutional law, and the illegitimate, unconstitutional, let me not say, who's in power now. We're under a coup. We got to stand up. That gentleman passing all those things, all those little flyers, go to everything there is. Go to everything there is that's patriotic. And bring your friends. Get your neighbors. Because it's so important and so crucial. One of the most, and I'll end here, one of the most emotional moments that I had was when we finally cleared and they finally let us go. And we had to go through this process to get out of Cuba. So we first had to go this one place and turn on stuff. They went and confiscated everything in our home. They sealed our home. They just put a seal on it. You can't open it. If you open it, you go to jail. And it was all our property. We couldn't give it away. We couldn't give it to our cousins, our family. It was property of the Cuban government. Excuse me. So we went all the way to the end, and then they decided to do the split, which was called the Peter Pan Project. If you ever do history, look that up. I'm not going to get into it. But what the idea was to separate children from parents and send the kids to the United States as orphans and keep the parents in Cuba. And they did that for a while until we all caught on. And so my dad says, we can't leave. We all leave or we don't leave. And so what they did is they sent us back home. Well, we didn't have a home now. Our house was sealed. So we went to our cousin. Now, by chance, by really the glory of God, The guy who is now vice president of Cuba was our neighbor across the street. And during the Batista administration, he was jailed for having Communist Manifesto. We have a constitution almost identical to the United States. So his mother talked to my dad and said, please get him out. He's being held illegally. And my dad says, you're right. I don't agree with communism, but he's right. So he went and he got this guy out. And the guy said, he was young. He was in his 20s. And he says, Sal, whatever you do, whatever happens in the future, you got me out of this. I surely would have been executed, and I will help you. This guy ended up being the biggest murderer of Cuban patriots in our Cuban history. He's still in power today. And when that happened, my dad went to him and says, I'm collecting on a promise. He says, give me your passport, give me your papers, get your uncle who's a photographer, take new pictures, give me new material, all that stuff. I will get you. In 24 hours, he had all the paper redone for us to get out. This is a miracle of God. In 24 hours, we were back in line going through the system. When we got to the same agent, he says, you're going to hand her this letter. Do not open the letter. It is sealed by me. At that time, he was head of internal security in Cuba and handed the paper to her. And I could see the disgust on her face when she read it. She goes, just go. You want to be free? Go. We're like, yeah. So we got there. We get on this plane. Outside of this plane that was unmarked were just dozens of Cuban military pointing machine guns at the plane. And they were taunting us. We will shoot you down. You will not get off this island. We will shoot you down. And we were under that threat. That's what my mother would tell me. I don't remember. I was so weirded out. Anyway, so I got it. We got in the plane, but I do remember this. We got on the plane. It was real quiet. And a guy that was standing had kind of broken Spanish. He said, I am a representative of the government of the United States. When this plane leaves the ground, you're on U.S. territory. But while it's on the ground, it is Cuban territory. You are not free to speak. Keep your mouth shut. Whatever they do doesn't matter. Anything they take, you could replace in the United States of America. There's nothing they could take, so don't give them the opportunity. And we sat there in our seats, and they came in, and they clubbed a couple of people. I could hear it. And I just sat there looking out the window at all those guys pointing guns. And I didn't think anything of it. A child doesn't think it. It was just like, what's happening? So I will tell you, that plane was quiet. They shut the door. They started taxiing. Everybody quiet. This part always gets me. And they handed out these sheets for us to read. And it said, welcome to the United States of America. As soon as this plane lifts off, you're in our land, in our country, and you are free. And we, as the American people, will do everything we can to help you succeed in a free nation. You are welcomed by us, and we will treat you with open arms. And you will become one of us. And that plane, as soon as it left the ground, people, it was just like all this shouting and screaming and crying and bawling, because we knew the minute that plane lifted off the ground, we were in the United States of America. There was nothing like it. We still had not hit land. But when that plane lifted, we did there. My mom just said, when you get off the plane, look for the flag, look for the flag, look for the flag. And I remember getting off, and I was so sick. I remember puking all over the bus and being so embarrassed. And the bus driver was like, don't worry, son, it's okay. I mean, I couldn't understand him, but he was like, okay, no worries. And so I got up there, and I kept looking, and yep, Miami International, right in the distance, I could see the red, white, and blue, just like she drew it. And I thought, oh my God. From that point on, I never experienced racism. There was more going on in Cuba than there was here. And I never felt treated different. I felt different because I couldn't speak English. But I never felt that from the American people. They're always welcoming. And that's how we are. So don't let them lie to you and say that we're a racist nation. We're not. Has there been racism? Yes. Has there been racial policies? Yes, mostly by the Democrats. So that's why you have to fight it. Don't let them label you. You label yourself. Don't let them label you. So here, I'm always proud. My wife is very involved now. I've created a monster, I tell you. she was so involved and not caring, and now she's like, you better get on it, we gotta do this. It's like, okay. But she is awesome. So I wanted to thank you for the privilege of speaking to you. No aceptan las mentiras del Partido Demócrata. Ellos son unos comunistas y solo quieren su voto para mantener poder y ganar nuestras libertades. Así que por favor, busca un buen candidato que está soportando y apoyando la Constitución de los Estados Unidos de América. Y ahí no vamos a fallar y todos vamos a triunfar. That being said, what I said was this. My brothers, my Latino brothers, rise up. Don't let the Democrats bring us under communism, because they will. The Democrat Party is gone. The one of your granddaddy and mom and daddy and all that are dead. They're gone. It is now the Communist Party of the United States. And the Republican Party is right behind it. Sorry, but that's the truth. If they won't stand up for the vote, which is our greatest privilege and right, then they're not for us. So we have to do everything we can to replace those people or tell them, straighten up or you're out. So I thank you for your time. I appreciate you. You're awesome. You all have stories. You all need to come up here and you need to share them. Thank you so much.